Salutations, my friends, and welcome back to Roz Knight's Squeeze the Quo, where this video we are focusing on cults. Last video I had focused on family in general, the term, before going into the Goncalves. I felt like let's separate them so we can just do whatever topic we like to look into and then the connections, timeline, and dynamics. I had mentioned in the previous video, I may look into cults, which when I was preparing for this next video of timeline, connections, and dynamics, it may be appropriate to get an understanding of what is a cult. This particular research paper I found focuses on the U.S. and other countries, but they found the most cults in the U.S. and in Spain, which I found interesting because that's where Kaylee was going. A lot of people surrounding her go to Spain in Central America. It could just be due to the location of Idaho and that how much it costs to go there and how long the flight is. Someone like me who lives in the Northeast, and I looked into it, for example, Hawaii. If you live in Idaho, it's about 4 to 5 hours shorter and about $500 cheaper. So that could be just location. So we'll just get into the intro of what is a cult and then do the research paper. The research paper I chose is about families dealing with their family members who are within a cult or just coming out or still in it, and the signs and the symptoms of it. When I read that, I will put up photos of social media posts surrounding the victims, as well as Greek life. So we're looking at Greek life. Is it a cult? And looking into it, it definitely has that feel of it, but you decide for yourself. So thank you to all the subscribers. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your comments and your support. So here, what's classified as a cult? Well, with AI overview, a cult is a group of people who share extreme beliefs and practices and who are often manipulated and harmed by their leaders. Cults can be religious, quasi-religious, or social groups. So the Greek system is a social group which entails with classified as a cult. And if you have been paying attention to this case or looking through the socials, it is quite extreme, and we'll get into that. So the characteristics of cults: unquestioning faith. Members have extreme devotion to a person, object, or goal. For the Greek system, it's the founders. Isolation. Members are cut off from outside influences and may be penalized for leaving. Part of me has a feeling that Kaylee and Maddie were separated for a reason. Authoritarianism. Cults are led by charismatic individuals who have absolute power and little accountability. We are witnessing that with our political structure right now. But just looking at the Greek system as a whole, at the amount of the amount that they are able to get away with having all of these hazing incidences and deaths. Manipulation. Cults use control and manipulation to keep members obedient. Hostility. Cults are secretive and hostile to outsiders. This alerted me very quickly in regards to the accused Brian Koberger. The narrative from the media as well within that community of Moscow was this outsider coming to our community. He came from Pennsylvania to here at a nearby state to commit these acts. This outsider came here to commit these acts to our close, tight-knit community. This outsider came here and threatened and committed these acts inside our community, which makes me think, what did Brian Koberger find out? What does he know? And why do they want the death penalty so adamantly? Illegal or dangerous behaviors. Let me go back to the hostility. I'm also thinking about Kaylee, Maddie, and Zaina in regards that they were no longer in the Greek system, living at 1122. Even though Ethan was still in the Greek system, he was dating someone who no longer was and staying at the home where ex-members were living. The other two survivors were current members of the sorority house. What I find interesting is that Maddie was Bethany's little. Maddie's no longer in the Greek system, so Maddie is no longer her little. So who is Bethany's new little? Even though they say through an interview that it doesn't matter anymore since COVID, I believe is bullshit, because the amount of tradition is deep-rooted about the founders and their principles and their morals. I don't think that just goes away from COVID. We also know it's a Greek house because of the body cam footage on September 1st and September 2nd, where the MPD officers were saying, we know that this is an off-campus Greek home. We know it has a sorority affiliation. So you have non-Greek members staying at a Greek home. I want to believe that there's something behind that. And along with these noise complaints, that house was targeted. Why? Could it be something as simple? Non-Greek members are in a Greek home. So illegal or dangerous behaviors, cults may engage in illegal or dangerous activities, which the Greek system does with their hazing practices, even though on their social media, they like to bandwagon or champion this spirit of no hazing. These hands don't haze, wearing the color purple. Looks great on paper. It is also on their chapters' websites, how hazing is illegal. They reprimand that, but it just keeps happening. Examples of cults some examples of cults include groups that claim to be Christian, but deny the deity of Christ and salvation by faith alone. This sounds a lot like The Family with that book I was telling you about with David Coe. Evangelicals, they talk about Jesus Christ, but they don't worship Jesus Christ, but they do worship devotion of the group. So that brings to, what does extreme mean? And this will help give you some context of what extreme is, the definition, so that when you look at Greek life, you can see how extreme it is. And that's done purposefully. And then you'll also hear it within the research paper. Extreme means existing in a very high degree, going beyond what is usual or expected, or reaching the furthest point of something. Essentially, it refers to something that is significantly beyond the norm, often considered to be excessive or radical in its intensity or nature. So key points of extreme. Beyond the ordinary. Extreme conditions are those that exceed what is typically experienced or considered normal. High degree of something, it implies a very large amount of intensity of a particular quality. Can be used in various contexts. You can describe weather, opinions, sports, or even emotions as extreme, depending on the situation. So it can be applied with the amount of Spirit Week, with the balloons, the hair, the music, the games, wearing the same colors. It's all a lot to entice you. It's to make you excited. It's extreme. Sisterhood. sisters for a lifetime, that type of thing. Examples of extreme in use, we're going to use opinions, holding very radical or strongly biased views on, instead of here it says political issue, we can put in social group. Views within a social group. And here's an example of extreme. This is a snippet of a video that is the Sigma Chi Rush video of 2023. Here is a member. On his chest, he has the letters on his chest with his cross, and then he has a tattoo on his arm that says family over everything. That is extreme. Family, Sigma Chi over everything. And what I've learning about this is it does pass from family to family sometimes. Family members have been in these fraternities and sororities, and so that is passed on to their nephews and nieces, even daughters or sons. So they're born into this ideal, this ideology, which seems normal to them, but it's not normal the way it is presented, the way it is ran, and that there are deaths going on due to their behaviors and not really seeing consequences for it. We do sometimes, but not at the amount it should be. So here is a post by Delta Gamma of the U of I, debunking sorority myths with DG. They had a few slides, but I'm going to do just 2 of them. So one myth they're saying is you're buying your friends. And here a member says, I know a lot of people think being in a sorority involves buying your friends, but that could be farther from the truth. I have made the most true connections in Delta Gamma and have experienced the most special friendships here. Before DG, I had good friends, but now I have friends that have turned into my sisters. Yikes. You can't buy love and connections, and in DG, we care and respect each other no matter what, which I have an issue with because there's plenty of empirical research and articles about bystanders within the college campuses, how bystanders are a part of witnessing these actions going on and not doing anything. Respect each other no matter what. So are you still respecting those who are hazing others? I'm sure we all have been within work scenarios or other type of scenarios where you see how some families or friends are loyal to a fault, where they allow someone within their group or family do bad things to good people and don't reprimand them, don't say anything. What that does is enable bad behavior, and it tells that person that they can go ahead and do it because you are consenting to that behavior. If I remember, I'll put a video clip of a podcast with Bill Burr and another comedian, and he was in a fraternity at USC, and he mentions that he was in one. He was kind of the comedian. He knew of it going on. He just stayed away from it. And then when those members who were part of that, he stayed away from them. He's like, I can't be around someone who does that. But still being within that group, you're still allowing it to happen. And the whole thing about sisters, that's a little too close. You know, there needs to be, you could say like sisters, but turned into my sisters. I feel so lucky to have made the connections and friendships I have in DG, and to know that what I'm a part of will last a lifetime. So that is an illusion right there. And you'll see in the research paper that kind of rhetoric was going as well with the other cults. But then when something bad happens, they realize it wasn't a lifetime. They were gone. And as we go through the connections, timeline, and dynamics, you'll see who posts like a memory and who does not. So this one is they're debunking that sorority rituals basically make it a cult. And this member says the stereotypes of joining a sorority can be intimidating, but in reality it is a group of women celebrating each other and showing appreciation to those who gave us the opportunity to do so. The word rituals might sound scary, but in reality they allow us to focus on our 4 values. And did I mention these were posted January of 2023, so this is after the massacre. These are to foster high ideals of friendship, promote educational and cultural interests, instill a sense of social responsibility, and develop the best qualities of character. We are always in equal parts celebrating our sisters and honoring the tradition to grow and continue to do so as was presented to us by our founders. So there is that high ideology, the founders, and how it can be intimidating by the rituals and just kind of downplaying it. You know, the word ritual can be intimidating, yes, within a group setting even more. So not to say that the reality is this. The high ideals of friendship, that's extreme. Not fostering the quality of friendship, it's the ideals and ideology. The promote educational and cultural interests, that is for their group. Not within the community, but just within their group. And to instill a sense of social responsibility, that is for their group. Not a social responsibility to the community. Like they say, it's about community, but it's about their community. And develop the best qualities of character. That I feel should be at the top, but it's at the bottom. You don't foster your own best qualities and character. You develop them based on what the founders have presented you. So here is a diagram of religions and cults, a comparison. So here on the right, or excuse me, on the left is religions and its mainstream acceptance. And religions practice rites, rituals, and ceremonies, dogmatic adherence to myths, supernatural or deistic beliefs. And then with cults, it's mainstream repudiations. I had to look that up, which is denial of the truth on validity of something. Validity of something. So denial of the truth. The mainstream has a denial of the truth on this and on if this is valid or not. So the reverence of spiritual leaders, sacred ideology from the founders, system of moral laws or doctrines are core 4 principles, veneration of sacred symbols, which means great respect, reverence. You'll see in the social media posts when I do the research paper, the amount of when they travel, they're in different countries, they will shoot their hand signals, they'll have their crescent, they'll have their flags, very symbolic. What's used very much today is the, hidden in plain sight. Okay, so here we have the research paper. And if if you're new to my channel, I just do a little information on what constitutes a good research paper, a quality research paper. Is it valid? So you have to look who has published it. And here it's the American Psychological Association back in 2021. So it's pretty recent. And then published again in 2022 by the Psychology of Religion and Spirituality. We also have to look at the references to see if it's all-encompassing. Do they use sources from psychology, sociology, medical, judiciary? Because we're dealing with people. People are all-encompassing. We're not black and white. We're not made to be that way. We're multi-dimensional and dealing with multi-dimensional aspects outside of us as well. So the title of this research paper, and also see if it's been peer-reviewed, is Cult Conversion from the Perspective of Families, Implications for Prevention and Psychological Intervention. The authors are from either from the Department of Psychology, University of Cordoba, which is in Spain, and Department of Psychology, New York University, Abu Dhabi. So here's a summary, and it's a quick one. Groups of psychological abuse, GPA, from here on out, organizations properly known as cults, are a well-documented social and public health problem that directly affect 1% of the global population. However, there are few studies that consider the process of cult conversion from the perspective of outgroup family members. This study aims to illuminate the process of cult recruitment, conversion, and disengagement, like the Greek system. They have a recruitment, the conversion, your bid day, and then you get your big, and then we don't know anything about the disengagement. That is in secrecy. And analyze the experiences, perceptions, and needs of cultist families. Quantitative and qualitative data were collected from 100 relatives of cult members in 15 different countries, with 2/3 of the respondents from Spain and the United States. Analysis revealed that warning signs, vulnerability factors, and motivational elements were key drivers for understanding the process of cult recruitment and participation. Moreover, results indicated that cult conversion of an individual has measurable mental health and well-being consequences for their relatives, as family members are often left legally helpless and without access to specialized psychological support. Collectively, these findings have implications for the prevention of cult conversion and clinical and psychosocial intervention. We conclude by discussing the results in the context of the current state of research and by emphasizing the need to bring visibility to the social and public health challenge. So the key words will be groups of psychological abuse, cults, families, and preventions. So groups of psychological abuse, GPA, properly known as cults, constitute a social problem that is difficult to operationalize and demonstrate in scientific terms. But thanks to a growing body of research into the phenomenon, it is possible to affirm that cults are a threat to public health. According to West and Lejeune, these groups are characterized by expressions of excessive devotion or dedication to a person, idea, or thing, and of using unethical manipulation, persuasion, and control techniques to achieve their goals. Examples include isolation from friends and family, the increase of suggestion and submission, application of strong group pressure, cancellation of individuality and critical judgment, and total dependence on the group. So I want to bring this up because in the interview with Chronicles Olivia, Steve had said that there was a change in behavior. In the beginning when she was in the sorority, we didn't see much of her, which I can see that normally in the beginning, but was it extreme? And what I found that was interesting is that Kaylee and Maddie, they grew up together, and I think it was even said that they rushed for the same house. In my other video, one of the females mentioned that you go and see all the homes, you have your preferential home and your preferential mom. And you write it on a piece of paper, your top 4 with your preferential at top, and then you hand those in. I'm assuming that, and they said that Maddie and Kaylee wanted to be in the same house, Alpha Phi, but were separated. And I find that interesting because as I was going through their social medias with the people surrounding them, there have been plenty of best friends who grew up together in middle school, high school, or even before then, and were in the same house together as well. So why were those two separated? So I'll just give an example here. And this last name is used a lot in this case if you follow it. Kotovich, Liz Kotovich. And this is her friend Maddie. And here she has a picture of her when they were children. And you will see a lot of pictures of students in front of this eye, the water tower, as well as in the media. When they are covering the story, they'll always have a shot with that in there. And here again is a shot by the eye. And here they are in Alpha Phi, which was Kaylee's sorority. And this is October 29th, 2021. And here is Maddie, and here is Liz. Malia Janes, she is in several of Kaylee's posts, being happy that you're my sister, which is right here. I'm lucky to have you as a sister. Malia Jane, happy birthday. And like this, I find that a little extreme, in my opinion. That'll be my personal boundary. It's a little much for me. Which, as I said before, maybe what their perception of what it was going to be like in a sorority was not what happened. It was more extreme, which could be a reason why they left or were asked to leave, because they weren't participating as much as they were needed to be by group standards. So here I find interesting where it says, Liz says, to the best friend anyone could ask for. Happy birthday, Maddie Marie. Thank you, Sig Kai, for blessing me with the best of the best. I love you endlessly. So I'm going to assume that she's talking to Sigma Chi for letting her be with the best of the best. They're in the sorority together. They're best friends, and they're in the same sorority. So I wonder how much pull Sigma Chi has with the Alpha Phi house of who's going to be in what home. I'm sure all the members of both sides do have some input. So why separate those two? I'm going to have to go back. And I watched recently the celebration of life that was taped, and it had Maddie's boyfriend, Jake, and all he talked about really was her characteristics of being a strong individual, how she had a strong presence. She was very observant. great sense of humor. And those are the characteristics where they don't want you to have when you're in these types of groups. As well as Kaylee and Xana. Maybe they were not adjusting to the group's demands. All right, so let's see. So these characteristics allow the group or the leader to meet their needs and objectives to the detriment of other cult members, families, and the community itself, which in turn violates people's freedom, identity, and dignity. Officially, epidemiological data are limited by the difficulty of identifying and locating these groups. But some authors estimate that in the United States alone, there could be upwards of 2,500 GPAs, which I want to say there's more. And I noticed within going through my research, there was a lot of tech companies that came that are cultish, or cults, as well as corporations. When there's a lot of money, I bet there's a lot of control. It's about the corporation. If you watch Severance, that gives me that same feeling. 2,500 GPAs and as many as 2.5 million members, which is significant. It is estimated that 5% of cultists remain in the group long enough to have offspring, which translates to 125,000 people born and raised within these communities in the United States. So when that happens, people don't realize if they're in one or not. I don't know if I mentioned before, I did a video on hazing, the typologies of it. You have an educator, the fool, and legacy. And you will see that within the photos or the posts, the social media, of having a mother-daughter coming from one of the sorority homes, or an uncle, so on and so forth. In Spain, meanwhile, the most recent figures count more than 150 groups with between 200,000 and 500,000 members. Worldwide, data suggests that approximately 1% of the general population is directly involved with the GPA on some level, which I've had my own personal experience within positions and companies that I would, mainly non-profit ones, are very cultish in nature. I don't last very long in those. What drives people to associate with these groups? Although there is consensus that no identifiable pre-cult personality exists, there are certain factors of vulnerability to recruitment. Some of these are described as life dissatisfaction, a desire for meaning, low tolerance for uncertainty, family relationship problems, spirituality, the need for belonging, feelings of confusion, loneliness, and self-esteem. So basically people who are vulnerable and can be taken advantage of, which is also done with those who are getting human and sex trafficked. The search for meaning is a relevant factor considering the emergence of the 3N model, which is needs, narrative, and network, which posits that obtaining personal significance is one of the key drivers of radicalization and intergroup conflict. In light of studies demonstrating the similarities between the process of cult conversion and violent radicalization in terrorist groups. The 3N model is a promising framework for the study of cult recruitment and the process of joining GPAs. On the other hand, there is evidence that living in a GPA can cause deleterious psychological effects in its former members, such as, we'll have to go through these again. Disassociation, post-traumatic stress, depression, self-harm, anxiety, psychotic delusions, cognitive rigidity, sleep disturbances, and deterioration of critical thinking. So, hearing that, I can't remember which sister of Kaylee's it was that posted her diary. It doesn't have a date, but she does post on there, she wants to get a better sleep cycle or sleep more hours, more exercise. She's doing a lifestyle change. So more exercise, more sleep, more alone time upstairs in her room, going for walks, prayer, be with God, her particular friendships. I would be interested to know what date that was. Was it pre, was it during, or was it post sorority? In turn, these experiences also produce other psychosocial disturbances such as feelings of loneliness, hopelessness, fear, guilt, and difficulties in social relationships or interpersonal conflicts. In this way, cult dependence and addiction disorders share numerous similarities. For instance, second-generation survivors, former members born and raised within a sectarian community, tend to display difficulties in socializing and adapting to adult life, which makes sense. It's a very codependent relationship. And experience a higher risk of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. However, and a lot of that too is not having boundaries, not learning to have personal space and personal boundaries. Therefore, that keeps you in a vulnerable state for others to take advantage of you because you can't say no, or you can't say stop, or you can't say don't do that because you have been stripped away of basically your identity. However, members of GPAs are not the only people adversely affected by these groups. Relatives are also negatively impacted. Determining to what extent is a key objective of our research. There is little literature examining the impact of cults on families and how the conversion of a family member influences outgroup members' lives and well-being. Most studies on the topic are decades old, are based on experiences observed in clinical practice, and focus almost exclusively on the parents of young cultists, thus ignoring other relationships of interest, such as spouses, partners, and children. Given the ambiguity of the phenomenon, it is common for studies in this field to make use of qualitative research designs such as open question surveys and semi-structured interviews, also known as open-ended questions. One of the main manipulation techniques of cults is social isolation and estrangement from loved ones, which, for whatever reason, I think about Kaylee and Maddie being separated and put into two different groups. And that was mentioned, they couldn't really spend much time together because they were in those different groups. They spent as much time as they could when they had breaks. And then I think they said, finally Kaylee and Maddie were able to finally live with each other in their senior year, which is really sad. Now they get back together and then this happens. Moreover, the family is typically the main source of support for recovery, given that relatives are frequently responsible for initiating requests for professional help and advice. Families also witness radical changes in their loved one's behavior, personality, and customs, which is increasingly perceived as more distant, apathetic, and conflictual, which was said in that interview. There was changes of behavior. In some cases, parents of young cultists report feelings of frustration and helplessness, sentiments that manifest as feelings of sadness, loss, and guilt, leading to depression or physical problems. And now that I'm thinking about this, people have asked and wondered how and they thought it was strange how the Goncalves really didn't know the home, haven't really gone to campus, how Keely was saying, oh, I can't wait for us. I promise we're going to hang out. I'll take you to lunch. Maybe this is part, it could be a reach, but maybe that's why they weren't going. That's maybe why they didn't drive down there, because of that separation of family and friends. Yes, they no longer were in the sorority, but I'm sure it grew more hostile. And how are 21-year-olds able to articulate what the hell's going on around them by people who they thought were their sisters, and now they're getting all of these noise complaint calls at their home that they're living at, clearly by the people who are surrounded by them, not strangers, but people they know of. As the available research makes clear, helping a loved one exit a cult requires professional advice. Unfortunately, mental health professionals and clinical psychologists are not always properly equipped to counsel, educate, and treat cultists and their families. And with my medical background, I can definitely see that is true. With this type of scenario, you need someone who specializes this. Just like a psychologist or a psychoanalyst who specializes in anorexia is not going to be able to help someone like this. Even though they said that cultists is kind of like an addiction, they had kind of the same similarities, that doesn't necessarily mean that someone of a professional status could help them. As well as in, let's say, a practical, like a medical aspect, you can't have an ortho surgeon do open heart surgery. So I can understand why this is difficult for people to get the help they need, because it's going to be a specialty. In fact, Lotic estimates that more than a third of the psychologists will, at some point in their career, work with former cult members in a clinical setting without being aware of it. Along the same lines, they warned that professionals can worsen the situation if they are not aware of the repercussions that a cult experience can have on patients' mental health. And I learned this also with my criminal justice. It's really hard for victims of domestic violence with spousal abuse. They go and get help, and their psychologist, if he's not aware of the signs and symptoms, could make things worse. In addition to insufficient health policies, there is often a lack of socio-political and legal measures in place by governments to combat the corrosive actions of GPAs. This is especially true in Spain, where a portion of our research participants reside, and there are no laws criminalizing psychological manipulation. Legal action can only be taken against a GPA if its members engage in criminal activities in the group's name, which in the US, that doesn't seem to help, but it's getting better. There are several reasons why we deem the testimonies of families as relevant to the study of GPAs. First, GPA members are a sample that can be scattered, difficult to access, and that sometimes remains inconspicuous. Second, they are a reliable source of information regarding people who are currently inside a cult, which is critical to identifying observable behavioral changes in cultists before and after cult conversion. And finally, gathering information from family members of cultists is a mechanism that allows families to communicate their needs during a challenging experience. Based on the above, the present research has four main objectives. To A, examine the information provided by the families as participating observers in the field of group psychological abuse. B, describe possible variables and mechanisms involved in occult recruitment and conversion and the process by which members leave. C, analyze the psychosocial consequences related to having a family member involved in a GPA. And D, examine the psychological support received by families in relation to this problem by measuring satisfaction levels and collecting suggestions for improvement. So the method is the design, and this just tells you the methodology. The participants. The sample includes 100 family members who witnessed the conversion of a relative to a GPA. Participants were from Spain, the United States, and 13 other countries, with between 1 and 7 respondents each. The type of relationship between the participants and the cultists include mainly parents, mothers and fathers, current and ex-romantic partners. And with that, with Kaylee and Jack, he was in a fraternity and she was in a sorority. So I wonder how much that impacted their relationship as well. And once we get into Jack, I keep hearing these rumors that he's much older than Kaylee, which I can show you he's not. They went to prom together. So we'll get into that in a later date. And children, along with siblings, cousins, and nephews. The age of participants ranged from 19 and 87 years old, which 19 is college age. Most of the participants reside in Spain and the U.S., and followed by Latin America. 69% of the sample completed university studies, which makes sense because if they were in one while they're in the university, which is the Greek system, which it's sounding more like it is. Even though they try to do the rhetoric that it is not, it very much is looking like it is. 25% secondary school and primary school. And those were probably the ones who were born into it. Regarding religious beliefs, 46 participants said they believed in God. 46 did not. 8 were undecided. 27% were agnostic. 23% were Catholic, and 19 were atheist. So the measures. So let's see. Let's look into this. We don't have to go through all of this. So the survey took 25 minutes to complete and included questions measuring knowledge of the GPA prior to family members' conversion, which is the preparation. B, underestimation of the problem at the time of discovery, the minimization. C, appreciation and emotional connection between the family members and the cultists, attachment. And D, hope that their family member abandons the group and their beliefs, hope of disengagement. And E, the feelings of shame or offense to family values due to cult conversion, family dishonor. So also the questionnaire measured family, social, and external support, as well as the need for help, the usefulness of information, and level of satisfaction with government support. And they did a point system of 1 to 7, 1 totally disagree to 7 totally agree. We asked in the survey the recruitment process, early signs and risk factors for cult conversion, possible preventative measures, and reasons for abandonment. We also asked families about the psychological effect of their relatives' cult conversion and the perceptions, perceived support, and availability of resources. All this qualitative information was collected using open questions. So they have a procedure. It was collected over 5 months. They also contacted experts and researchers who study GPAs through corporate email, as well as associations related to the prevention of cult activities, both in Spain and internationally. So they have some groups here, some organizations. Furthermore, we disseminated the questionnaire on social media, particularly on platforms where former members of various cults are active. And the data analysis, we won't go too much into it, but yeah, we won't go through that. So the results, the descriptive data about cultists. So I'm not going to say the percentages. I'm just going to read through it. So based on this sample of family members, I will do this one. 57% were female, 39 were male, 4 were unreported. More than half the followers had a university education, which makes sense. A percentage had high school education. We went through that already. 66 were employed. 22% were unemployed. At the time, 69% were still in the cult. 22% had already left. The remainder did not answer. 29% of the people affiliated with the GPA had a diagnosis of a previous mental disorder known to their relatives. So they were depression, psychotic disorder, anxiety, eating disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, autism spectrum disorder, bipolar disorder, and other. So they're vulnerable. They're in a vulnerable state. 35% of the sample reported that their loved one's cult conversion took place between 1 and 5 years ago. 10% from 6 to 10 years ago, 34 more than 10. There were only 9 cases in which the discovery of the cult relation occurred a few months before the survey. Approximately 1/3 of the participants did not maintain contact with their currently cultist family member, compared to the remaining 67% who did establish some frequency of contact. So, descriptive data from the questionnaire related to perceived support. So the item, and we're not going to go through the statistic part. So they have here, there's 8 of them. I felt supported by my family after discovering the cult involvement. I felt supported by my friends after discovering the cult involvement. I feel supported by my family currently. Okay, so I feel supported by external organizations, police associations, psychologists. I think it would be useful to provide more information to families. I think I need more help to overcome this difficult situation. I think that the problem of joining cult groups is well addressed in my country. And that came with various degrees of mean, medium, mode of percentages, which we're not going to get into. So 42 different groups. These were classified into 6 types: religious, therapeutic, personal development, political, and pyramid trading. The remainder did not answer the optional question. According to the available data, the cultic groups most represented in this research are religious, mainly those with neo-Christian characteristics, followed by Eastern-type philosophy and beliefs related to UFO and extraterrestrial phenomenon. In 64% of the cases, the cultist was the first family member to join the GPA, compared to 36% of the surveys, which reported that other relatives had previously joined. Nearly half of them were recruited offline, meaning in person. 99% recruited online. 16 were targeted by both means of recruitment. And I'm surprised, I noticed when I was looking for more research papers on this, a lot of the doomsday cults was brought up, as well as surviving those survivalists. So early signs and detection of conversion. In 51% of cases, respondents reported that they themselves were the first in the family to discover the connection of their relative in the GPA, with the remainder reporting discovery by another family member or friend of the cultist. Regarding the early signs showing a link to a cult, we analyzed the responses provided by 95% of the participants and identified a number of red flag indicators. The most prominent sign expressed by 47% was distancing from loved ones, both from family and friends. 31% indicated behavioral changes in their relative. The most common were changes in habits, diet, clothing, taste, and leisure, and perceived changes in character or personality. He stopped being him and he changed his way of being, were frequent observations. Also noted was the appearance of negative emotionality in relatives. She was always afraid. She became silent and depressive, as well as changes in language and emergence of violent behavior. Some participants also became suspicious of their relatives' relationship with the group in question. 15% referred to an excessive participation of the person in the group's activities. They spent whole days with the guru. He spent too much time with the group. And 12% highlighted attempts to recruit other people into the GPA, as well as constant allusions to the virtues of the group. Monothematic and repetitive conversations, such as, she began to speak of the founder as little less than a savior of humanity. He spoke of that group as if it were the best that had happened to him. To a lesser extent, survey respondents perceived an unhealthy dependence of their family member on the group. They became unable to make decisions independently without consulting them first. 12% of the participants perceived changes in their relative at the cognitive level, such as loss of critical thinking. He returned to having a child mentality. She has limited freedom of thought. Extremist and radicalized ideas, such as rigid thinking and black or white, did not accept different perspectives. That sounds like what my teachings were in my criminal justice, how police think. It's very black and white, very rigid, not into other perspectives. And disorientation seemed absent. Finally, family members observed other signs such as restrictions, like the abandonment of medical treatments or their studies, abuse toward another family member, and behaviors described as those exhibited by strangers. Shows the different early signs identified by survey respondents. Risk factors, preventative measures, and reasons for abandonment. So they identified 107 references to these factors. 61 of them were situational and 46 were personal. Among the situational factors, the main precipitants were the presence of other family members in the GPA, family or partner problems, and before I go on, here is a table of early signs of cult conversion. So, early signs mentioned: family distancing, social isolation, which we mentioned, changes of habits, change in character, negative emotionality, language changes, violent behavior, relation with the group, excessive participation, proselytizing, dependence, cognitive changes, less critical thinking, radicalized thinking, disorientation, and others, restrictions, abuse, strange behavior. The manipulative actions carried out by the GPA, other factors included the death of a loved one, the lack of social support, and contact with the members of the group responsible for the recruitment. Frustration with studies and work was also a driver, as was the recent diagnosis of an illness. The other situational factors referred to unspecified situations such as a bad time in life, and these are the factors that led them to a cult, or emotional difficulties experienced at the time. Among the personal factors, the most reported motivations were life dissatisfaction and the search for meaning, followed by low self-esteem or stages of depression. Spirituality and poor critical thinking were also identified as possible vulnerabilities. Finally, dependence and the need for a group membership were mentioned in 5% of the cases, followed by 4% that perceived adolescents as a risk of factor for cult recruitment. And in medical aspects, ages 18 or 19 through 23 is considered late adolescence. The remaining personal factors were associated with other particularities such as sexism, submission, and perfectionism. Shows the classification of the situational and personal factors mentioned. So, in terms of potential preventative measures that could have halted conversions, they found, you have to avoid direct contact with recruiters. Moreover, improved support and communication can defend against cultist recruitment, and similar percentages of having better knowledge information about the dangers posed by GPAs can protect vulnerable relatives. Some cases said the idea of seeking psychological help, and others could not think of ways that their family members' conversion might have been circumvented and instead perceived the event as inevitable, meaning possibly going into Greek life. Because you will see how Kaylee and Maddie met members of their sorority home before they even graduated high school. Let's see. And the remaining already met their relative after the conversion. So a real impossibility. Provides examples of each type of preventative measure mentioned. We also investigated what situations could promote abandoning a GPA in its beliefs. And 31% said they did not conceive of any possible situation in which they could have managed to recover their family member. 10% were undecided, and 42% of the affirmative answers, more than half, were cases in which the cultists had already left the group. The most mentioned reasons for abandonment referred to great social and family support, improved communication with family members, and increased familial bonding. Mother-daughter love, family affections, ask us for help to live with us. 5% mentioned the help of external professionals. The advice received helped my daughter to abandon her sectarian beliefs. She managed to leave the group after much psychoeducation and counseling. Moreover, internal disappointment with the group's contradictions, the lack of coherence of the doctrine in relation to the facts, and the appearance of critical events that triggered the abandonment, suffering some illness or accident and realized that the group does not care about them, were present in 4% of the cases. So they're in the group, they're in it, something life-altering happens, and they see that what they've been saying, it's that whole saying, actions speak louder than words. Expulsion, direct distancing from other cultists, and access to alternative information about the group were reported by 3% of the participants. And finally, 2 people mentioned the discovery of the truth about the leader's intentions. The other answers detailed more specific situation. The group dissolved in a way imposed by the authorities. It should find the true God and stop believing in cults. So there's many ways that you can, if you know someone who's part of these cults, may not be aware of it, and you can see it because you're on the outside looking in and you see all these different factors are going on. There are different ways of trying to get them to wake up and see what's actually going on. So this is a good study to show that even though it's a small percentage, it still worked by just giving them education, by showing more support, by getting them to see contradictions. And then some of them just learned on their own. They started seeing things, and then with the family support on top of it will help them get out of that. So it's talking about the impact of the families and how much it hurts them. It affected their lives, like depression, trauma and fear, sleep problems, physical problems, emotional imbalances. So at the top it says preventative strategies considered by the participants according to their experiences. And we kind of went through this. Avoid contact with the others, have a greater closeness and communication, provide information, real impossibility, perceived impossibility, seek psychological help. So this is more about the family. Or here are, what did I miss here? My apologies. Impact on the family. So these are family members. Parents reported the most health-related problems, responses included. So this is their response. So loss of contact with loved ones, divorces, estrangement, and family division were mentioned in 36% of cases. So I don't want to go through too much because we're already at an hour. I just want to do like the core. If you made it this far, you are mentally strong. Desired resources and improvement proposals. So we asked participants what resources they wish they had to help cope with their relative's cult conversion. 65% referred to expert sources, including specialized psychologists, information, and support groups with other families and former members. Legal helplessness in dealing with corrosive groups was a concern, and others called for the creation of laws to support related persons and their families. Have a greater involvement and understanding was needed on the part of police and judges. Others alluded to social resources such as social and family support, or to personal qualities like communications, patience, and understanding. As one participant put it, I would have liked to have had access to some kind of manual and not have had to learn the most basic things from scratch. We had to learn what a cult is, how they work, how to act with a family that did not understand anything, find associations, etc., and all with the scarcity of resources there is. But even as some respondents blamed themselves, said government measures in their country are ineffective at combating cult recruitment, which I want to say they're saying that about Spain, but I'm not quite sure about the laws in America. Okay, let's go on here. So let's see here. 32% mentioned the need for more accessible and trained therapists in terms of psychological manipulation groups. I looked for someone who was familiar with cultic groups, but couldn't find anyone to talk to. The local churches in our area are not educated in this matter, one participant wrote. Once a percentage said pseudo-education and factual information should be more easily accessible. It could have been better if I had the information earlier than what had happened. More education must be given on how these groups operate and on teaching and educating children, observed another. Another percentage indicated the need to reform laws in order to obtain legal support for supporters and families, and a percentage referred to improving police involvement. Said one surveyor taker, both the police and the judicial system should give much more support to family members who want to do something and offer evidence. In this way, the direct involvement of family members can be avoided. Which I can see that because they could just exasperate it within the group. And when you have a person who's in a position of power who's wearing a uniform, be more effective. And we did see a lot of the interaction between sorority or fraternity sorority members with the cops in that body cam footage. You saw a dynamic there. 8%, and we may have to look at those videos together and see after we have learned about this. 8% alluded to the creation of more mutual support groups with former members of GPAs and or their families. Another percentage wanted to promote the creation of prevention campaigns aimed at raising awareness of cultic dynamics within at-risk populations and educational centers, and for more of a collaboration from the church and public bodies. Desired resources and proposed improvements are presented in this table. Okay. So here's some testimonies. It was difficult having to research, learn, and fight alone. Any support, understanding, and help would have been essential. The legal support and understanding on the part of the police and justice are totally improvable. We feel helpless and alone. There was no institution or public resource that had any answer or help for my mother's case. I also had no support for the rest of my family. From the rest of my family. They tell me that I am literally crazy when I try to explain the situation to them and why it is so dangerous. All the support, help, and information that I have obtained has been because I have moved heaven and earth through friends, acquaintances, and a couple of associations that had no public support. The police and the FBI should help. Support groups and therapists should be easy to find. I have worked very hard to find any help. They have discussed possible ways to remove my relative from the group, which are very expensive and difficult to carry out. So, here's the discussion. All right, so our research findings are consistent with previous studies on cultist behavior. For instance, more than half of those linked to a GPA, as reported by family members in our sample, have a university-level education, in line with past work demonstrating that cultists typically have above-average intellect. Which I can definitely understand because I'm sure we all met people who are very, very, very book smart, but then when they try to apply that knowledge that they received in a practical matter, they have a very difficult time. Or we've met people who are very, very, very book smart and have difficulties being able to socialize. And I can see within these groups, it's all about power and control. And what we see with the Greek life, the Greek system, they go into politics, and I'm sure they use, and you will see, they use people's degrees to help elevate their image, like marketing, business, accounting, psychology. So, and as I mentioned about the tech companies, these very smart individuals who have degrees can be used by companies of their degrees, but at the same time, these very smart people may not have the social awareness of what is going on. You know, you kind of want to have both in life. You want to have some book smarts and you want to have some street smarts. You need a balance of both for your safety and security. Let's see here. Moreover, almost a third of cultists in our study were diagnosed with a mental disorder prior to cult conversion. This figure is similar to older research and supportive of the notion that there are no differences in the prevalence of mental problems in cultists as compared to the general population. And that's like a social myth, saying that people are in cults, they must have problems, mental problems, which is not necessarily true. And here they say, on the other hand, the use of online recruitment in our sample reflects an increase in the reliance on new technologies for cult recruitment, a trend observed in other kinds of online persuasion, such as radicalization, different types of cyber abuse, or so-called grooming by child sex offenders. Which, that's quite the language for so-called grooming by child sex offenders. All right, so early signs of cult involvement. The early signs of cult conversion identified by families in our study are similar to warning signs outlined in prior research. Exercising control over cultist behavior, emotions, cognitions, and environment. Nonetheless, additional work is needed to further develop knowledge of the early warning signs of cult conversion, a contribution to the literature that would facilitate the creation of preventative tools for families and enable earlier interventions. So here they're saying this is a start with this research, but definitely could use improvement. This can be used as a jumping off point. Risk factors and preventative measures. So the main risk factors for joining, these findings also parallel those found in terrorism studies. 66% of the people who have joined a radical group had a friend within the organization. Risk factors for conversions, life dissatisfaction, search for meaning, a greater need for cognitive closure than the control group, principles that stipulated by the 3N model, needs, network, and I can't remember the other one. So preventive measures. We kind of went through that, eliminating contact between family members and GPA recruiters. Although this is an unrealistic preventative measures, other suggestions such as achieving greater family closeness and learning about the cultic phenomenon are established means of protecting against the conversion of a loved one to a cult. So here is the impact of the families. And let's just read the conclusion so we can wrap this up. If you like, I can go ahead and link this into the description. I can go ahead and do that. Based on the objectives set out in this research, we can establish the following implications and applications. First, families are a reliable and relevant group for the investigation of groups of psychological abuse and the cultic phenomenon. Due to their privileged positions in the process of recruitment, connections and separation, participation of relatives as observers is essential to obtain relevant information in terms of prevention and psychosocial intervention. By witnessing the evolution of their loved ones, they can recognize relevant cognitive and behavioral changes that others cannot. The results obtained in this research largely coincide with what has already been found in previous studies. Second, regarding variables related to cult recruitment and engagement processes, the following findings are noteworthy. They are vulnerability factors to cultic uptake related to the presence of other nearby cases, such as other family members related to the cult, the search for meaning and other personal crises, awareness and detection of the warning signs of possible cultic involvement may be useful in developing prevention tools for families, and many relatives of cultic members have difficulty identifying possible preventative actions or hypothetical situations of GPA abandonment. Third, the cult conversion of a family member has important repercussions for the health and well-being of relatives. For instance, it causes high levels of psychological suffering that can manifest as diagnostic pathologies. These families constitute a clinical population of interest that requires greater knowledge about GPAs by professionals in mental health and clinical intervention. Fourth, although the majority of families in our sample experience recruitment and conversion without prior knowledge of the cult phenomenon, most do not underestimate the severity of the problem. The effectiveness connection between family members and the cultists is predominantly strong, especially with parents. However, there are also cases of resentment and disappointment, mainly by children and couples. Family members, especially the children of cultists, generally have little hope of recovering their loved ones. And finally, family members of people connected to GPAs tend to feel lost, helpless, and misunderstood by their social network. In addition, they express not having sufficient access to resources to deal with GPAs. Therefore, there is an urgent need for trained and accessible professionals, greater clinical and legal support, and stronger prevention efforts. In short, this research can promote awareness of the reality of families affected by GPAs. In order to promote better prevention, counseling, and psychological intervention, future research is necessary to make this serious social and public health problem more visible, and to obtain greater scientific evidence on the cultic phenomenon and its impacts. So let me know in the comments what you think about this, if you've gotten this far, or if you have not, or take it in bits and pieces. But that one variable, when they said how, the family, they become isolated from their family, and it's hard for them to get back together once they've been in this type of group. I mentioned it earlier how now, after reading about that, people thought it was strange how their parents haven't really had been there. They really weren't that involved. It's an hour and a half away. And I just took it as, well, it's an hour and a half away. They have their own lives. The victims were busy at the time. They do have Parents Week, so on and so forth, which was the allotted time for the parents to go see them. So maybe that is why. It was because they were isolated from their family. They were told, no, I'm busy. I got this to do. And it just seemed like normal college behavior, because they had, we have homecoming, or we have this ball, or we're going out to a camping trip, or we're going to do this trip together. So they're always heavily involved. They were isolated from their families. And then when this happened, people were surprised that they didn't go down. Well, if you were told always not to go down there, you're not going to go down there. And as I mentioned, you shouldn't be driving when you have some type of trauma that has happened to you like that. So go ahead and think about it. I'll put this in the description for you to read on your own if you like. Let me know in the comments if you like this type of format of what I'm doing, and I will get the other video ready to do within a day or so, hopefully. So until next time, thank you for being here.